The night my son accused me of stealing his money, I had no idea that the truth I'd been hiding for years would unravel everything I thought I knew about love, betrayal, and family. But it wasn't until he opened the letter I'd been avoiding, until he uncovered the hidden fortune I had kept from him, that I realized the life I had spent protecting him from would soon destroy everything we'd built. And as the secrets began to surface, I had to ask myself, was I protecting him all along? Or was I the one who needed saving? And as the truth finally came to light, I realized the only thing left to save was myself. I'm Vivian Rodas, and I'm no longer hiding. I stood in the living room, staring at my son, Caleb, as he paced, back and forth, his face red with anger. The air was thick with tension, his eyes were wild, his voice sharp, and his words cutting deep. "How could you do this to me, Mom?" Caleb's voice cracked, betraying the anger he was trying so desperately to hold together. "How could you steal my money and leave me with nothing?" I stood frozen, the weight of his accusation hanging in the air like a thick fog. My chest tightened, my hands gripping the edge of the table, but I didn't say a word. I couldn't. Caleb had always been my golden boy, the one who made me proud from the moment he was born. I had raised him with every ounce of love I had, teaching him right from wrong, encouraging his dreams, and protecting him from the harshness of the world. He was the child who made me believe in unconditional love. But now, here he was, accusing me of something I had never even thought to do. "Why would I steal from you?" I finally asked, my voice trembling, though I did my best to keep the hurt from spilling out. The words tasted bitter in my mouth. "You tell me," Caleb spat, his face contorted in disbelief. "All this time you've been hiding money, lying to me, and now I find out you've been keeping things from me for years. My own mother, stealing from me." The accusation hit like a slap across my face, and my heart sank. My son had never spoken to me this way, not even in his angriest moments. I wanted to reach out, to hold him, to tell him it wasn't true. But instead, I found myself standing there, paralyzed, unable to defend myself. It started a week ago, when I had received an unexpected letter in the mail. The envelope was thick, official-looking, with a return address I didn't recognize. When I opened it, I was stunned to find that it was from a lawyer's office. The letter detailed the terms of a will that I had never seen before, one that named Caleb as the sole beneficiary of a significant fortune. I stared at the letter, my mind racing. It was from my late husband, Daniel, who had passed away 2 years ago. I had never thought much about his finances, always trusting him to handle the business side of things. But now I realized that there was something I didn't know, something important. The letter outlined how Daniel had set up a trust, leaving behind a large sum of money, enough to change Caleb's life forever. But there was one condition. Caleb had to prove that he could manage the fortune responsibly. He had to demonstrate maturity and financial acumen before the full amount would be transferred to him. The stipulation struck me as odd. Daniel had always been open about his money, and Caleb was a smart, ambitious young man. Why would he need to prove himself? I didn't know it then, but that letter was the beginning of a chain of events that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family. It would expose secrets, lies, and betrayals that I had buried deep within myself. And it would lead to the moment when Caleb, my own flesh and blood, would accuse me of stealing from him. The truth was, I hadn't stolen a dime from Caleb. But the situation was far more complicated than either of us had realized. I had learned the truth about my late husband's hidden assets that had been entrusted to me. Daniel had left me in charge of a fortune he had built over the years, and it was meant for Caleb. But I hadn't told him about it. I hadn't shared the secret with anyone. At the time, it seemed like the right thing to do. Caleb had always been reckless with money, always spending on things he didn't need, always looking for the next big thrill. He was impulsive, and I had seen how his lack of responsibility had led him down difficult paths in the past. I was afraid that if I gave him access to the fortune too soon, it would ruin him. I wanted to protect him, even if it meant hiding the truth from him. But I hadn't anticipated that Caleb would find out about the money before I was ready to tell him. I hadn't realized how far my silence would push him, how the weight of his own insecurities would manifest in anger and betrayal. Now standing in front of him, I felt a pang of guilt and fear. I wanted to explain, to make him understand. But how could I? How could I explain a decision that I had made out of love and concern when it had ended up hurting him so deeply? Caleb stopped pacing and looked at me, his eyes now filled with something I hadn't seen before: pain. "You're not the woman I thought you were, Mom. I trusted you, and now you've stolen from me. You've kept me in the dark about everything, about the money, about Dad's will. You've made me feel like I didn't matter." His words pierced me, but they also woke something inside me, something that had been dormant for far too long. I had kept silent for so long, trying to protect him from the truth, from the mess. That was our family's financial history. But maybe, just maybe, it was time for the truth to come out. It was time for Caleb to see what I had been protecting him from all along. "Caleb," I whispered, my voice breaking, "I didn't steal from you. I've been trying to protect you, but I've made mistakes. I never meant to hurt you. Please, just hear me out." He took a step back, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression hard. "I don't know if I can trust you anymore, Mom." And with that, my heart shattered. Caleb didn't wait for me to say more. He turned on his heel and stormed out of the living room, his footsteps echoing in the hallway as he disappeared into his bedroom. I stood there, staring at the door he had slammed shut behind him. My breath felt shallow, my heart a heavy lump in my chest. There was a quiet hum in the air now, an unspoken tension that I could almost feel vibrating through the walls. I had never imagined it would come to this. For years, I had prided myself on being a good mother, on providing Caleb with everything he needed. I had put aside my own dreams, my own needs, just to give him the best possible life. And yet here I was, standing in the ruins of my son's trust, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. The money, the fortune I had kept hidden from Caleb felt like a weight I couldn't bear anymore. For so long, I had held on to it, telling myself it was for his own good. But now I wasn't so sure. Maybe I had been too afraid to face the truth, that my son, despite his wild ambitions and reckless behavior, had the right to make his own choices, to take control of his life, even if it meant stumbling along the way. I sank onto the couch, the silence of the house pressing in on me. How had we gotten here? How had Caleb gone from being the bright, confident child I raised to this angry, disillusioned young man who couldn't see beyond the hurt I had caused him? The love I had poured into him felt like it was slipping through my fingers, like sand running through a clenched fist. The truth was, I had been hiding more than just money. The fortune that Daniel had left behind wasn't the only secret I had kept. There were other things I hadn't told Caleb about his father, things I had kept from him out of fear that the truth would break him. Daniel had always been a man of mystery, a man who preferred to keep his business dealings to himself. It was part of what made him so successful, but it also made him distant, cold even, when it came to sharing important aspects of his life with me. After Daniel died, I discovered how many things he had kept hidden. The financial trust was just one part of it. There were other accounts, investments, properties I hadn't known existed. Caleb had never been close to his father, and in many ways I had shielded him from the truth of Daniel's complicated legacy. I told myself it was because Caleb was young and had enough to worry about with his own future. I didn't want him to carry the burden of his father's secrets, but in doing so, I had kept him in the dark, left him vulnerable to disappointment when the truth came crashing down. I hadn't meant to deceive him. I hadn't meant for it to all unravel like this. But maybe it was inevitable. Maybe Caleb was always going to find out. And when he did, maybe I had been too afraid to face him with the truth, thinking I could control how he would react, how he would view me. As I sat there, lost in my own thoughts, I heard Caleb's door creak open from down the hallway. His footsteps were slower this time, more deliberate, but there was a tension in the air that made me wonder if he had calmed down at all. I didn't turn to face him right away. I couldn't, not until I had some semblance of clarity about what I was going to say. "Mom?" His voice was quieter now, but there was still an edge to it, a frustration that lingered like smoke in the air. I turned, slowly, my hands folded in my lap. He stood in the doorway of the living room, his arms hanging loosely at his sides. His eyes were bloodshot, and his face was pale, as though the fight had drained all the life from him. For the first time, I saw him not as the angry young man who had accused me of stealing, but as the lost boy who had just realized the world wasn't as simple as he had once believed. "Caleb," I said softly, "I know you're angry. I understand why, but you have to know something." He crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing. "What? That I've been an idiot? That I was right all along? That you've been lying to me, keeping things from me? What am I supposed to think?" I stood up, my voice steady, but my hands trembling. "You're right. I kept things from you. I kept things from all of you, even from myself. But not because I didn't trust you. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was making the right decisions. I was trying to keep you safe." Caleb shook his head, the anger still bubbling beneath the surface. "By stealing my money? By keeping me out of the loop? How is that protecting me?" I sighed, stepping closer to him, my heart aching. "Because, Caleb, I didn't think you were ready. I didn't think you would be able to handle it. I saw how you were with money. Always. Reckless. Always looking for a quick fix. I didn't want you to destroy yourself with it." For a moment, he was silent, his eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite read. His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. "I wasn't stealing from you," I continued, my voice softening. "I was trying to protect you. I made a mistake by not telling you. And I'm sorry for that. But I need you to understand. I never meant to hurt you." The words hung between us, suspended in the charged silence. Caleb finally looked away, staring at the floor. It was as though the weight of everything I had said finally began to sink in. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected me to admit that I had made mistakes. He hadn't expected me to be vulnerable, to show him the cracks in my armor. "I just don't know what to believe anymore," Caleb muttered, still not looking at me. "I don't know what's real." I stepped closer, my heart aching for him. "Caleb, I know this is hard. I know I've kept too many things from you, but I need you to understand that everything I did out of love. And now, all I want is for you to see the truth. Not just about the money, but about everything." For the first time since the argument began, Caleb lifted his head, meeting my gaze. The anger in his eyes had faded slightly, replaced by a flicker of confusion, maybe even a little pain. "I don't know how to trust you again," he whispered. I exhaled slowly, stepping back and sitting down. "I can't fix the past, Caleb. I can't change what's been done, but I can try to make things right now. I'll explain everything to you. I'll tell you everything." He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes searching mine, before he nodded slowly. But even then, I knew the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There was a lot I had to explain, a lot of truths I had hidden from him, from myself, and as much as I wanted to believe that everything would be okay, I knew the real battle had only just begun. The days after our confrontation felt like an eternity. Caleb was distant, though not as volatile as he had been during that initial explosion. He would come down to the kitchen in the mornings, grab his coffee, and sit in silence at the table. He never looked at me directly, but I could feel his eyes on me, measuring, searching, trying to figure out if I was still the mother he once knew, or if I had become a stranger in his life. I wasn't sure what to expect next. Would Caleb come to understand? Would he forgive me? Or would we simply exist in the same house, two people bound by blood, but divided by a truth that neither of us fully understood? The evening after our conversation, I took out the letter from the lawyer once more. It had been sitting in the drawer of the desk, its corners bent from being folded and refolded in my hands. I hadn't been able to look at it again until now. But as I read through the terms for the 100th time, something became painfully clear. I hadn't just been hiding money. I had been keeping secrets about Daniel, about his life, about the way he had built everything we had together. Daniel and I had always had a complicated marriage. We had loved each other in our own way, but the distance between us had grown over the years. He had become absorbed in his work, consumed by the need to maintain control over everything around him. I often joked that he loved his business more than he loved me, and I knew there was truth in that. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was a part of Daniel I never really knew, the part that had made decisions that would affect me, Caleb, and our future long after his death. The fortune left behind wasn't just money, it was an empire. There were properties I hadn't known about, hidden accounts that Caleb would inherit, and a trust that Daniel had set up for his son with more care than I had ever seen him show in our marriage. The letter from the lawyer, while it seemed simple enough, was just the surface. It didn't explain everything, and I knew there was more beneath it. I hadn't had the courage to dig deeper into Daniel's financial history until now. Perhaps I had been afraid of what I might find, or maybe I had told myself it didn't matter. After all, Daniel was gone. What good would it do to open old wounds? But the letter, the fortune, the accusations, it all felt like a puzzle I needed to solve. Not just for Caleb, but for myself. I sat down at the desk, the faint smell of dust in the air as I rifled through old files. Some of them were documents about the house, the business, even the vacation home in the mountains where we had spent so many weekends over the years. But it wasn't until I reached the last folder that everything clicked into place. There, at the very bottom, was a folder labeled Private. The label was faint, as if it had been added later, and I hesitated for a moment before opening it. Inside was a series of letters, financial statements, and documents that made my heart race. Daniel had been far more meticulous about his assets than I had realized. There was a partnership, an investment in a business venture, and a list of properties I had never heard him mention. But what stood out most was a letter from the year before his death, written by him but addressed to no one. In that letter, Daniel had poured out his regrets. He spoke of his choices, his failures, and his inability to connect with the people who mattered most to him. He wrote about his love for Caleb, about how proud he was of his son, but also about how much he had failed him. Daniel acknowledged that he had never been there for Caleb the way a father should be, and that the relationship had always been strained. He had written this letter not to apologize, but as a form of closure, a way to make peace with the choices he had made. As I read his words, a sense of sadness washed over me. Daniel hadn't just left me behind in life, he had left me behind in death too. He had kept so much from me, and in the end, it wasn't just about money or assets. It was about the way he had lived, the way he had pushed me to the margins, while he built his world around himself. But in his final months, it seemed Daniel had changed. Maybe he had realized what was slipping away, or maybe he had just come to terms with the fact that there wasn't much time left to make amends. The letter mentioned a meeting with a lawyer, the creation of a trust, and the decision to leave everything he had to Caleb. I paused for a long moment, the words sinking in. Caleb didn't know this side of his father. He didn't know that Daniel had come to regret his choices, that he had wanted to make things right. All Caleb had seen was the distant, cold man who had never been there for him. And now, all Caleb could see was the fortune, the money, the properties, the business. But he couldn't see the man who had created it all, the man who had tried, at the very end, to make a different choice. The tears came without warning. Not for Daniel, not for the past, but for Caleb, for the son who had never gotten the chance to hear the truth, to understand the complexity of his father's actions. For the boy who had been left in the dark, who had been made to feel like his worth was tied to money, to possessions, to what could be handed down to him. I folded the letter carefully, placing it back into the folder before closing it. I knew I had to show Caleb everything, the secrets, the truth, the good and the bad. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about finally giving him the chance to understand his father, to understand me, and to understand the truth of everything that had been hidden from him for so long. I had to find a way to make Caleb see that this wasn't just about the fortune Daniel had left behind. This was about something far more valuable, the chance to rebuild, to heal, and to move forward without the shadows of the past haunting us. The days that followed felt like a slow-motion unraveling. Caleb seemed to have retreated into his own world, his anger now replaced with a quiet distance. We barely spoke, except for the occasional word here or there when necessary. He still came home each night, but the warmth that had once filled our house, the simple, quiet conversations we used to have, was gone. There was a chill between us now, a silence that neither of us knew how to break. I knew what I had to do. I had to confront Caleb, had to tell him everything. But even as I made plans to do so, the weight of the past kept pulling me back. The truth was too big, too complex to explain in one sitting. But it had to be said. He had to understand. The money, the trust, the life Daniel had left behind, it all needed to be laid out in front of him, raw and uncut, so that he could finally see the bigger picture. I spent that evening sorting through the documents again, each paper a reminder of the life we had built, of the secrets that had been buried in the fine print of Daniel's business dealings. There was something about the financial details, the properties, the accounts, the investments, that felt cold, distant, numbers on a page. But it wasn't just numbers. It was about legacy. It was about Caleb, and it was about me. And I couldn't let him think I had been keeping secrets out of greed or malice. I had to make him see that it wasn't about the money. It was about what we did with it. As I sat there, the house quiet around me, I couldn't help but think about the years I had spent trying to protect Caleb, trying to shield him from the harsh realities of life. I had always been the one to pick up the pieces when things went wrong, the one to smooth over the rough edges. But somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of the fact that Caleb needed to face the hard truths, just as much as I did. I thought about all the times he had come to me with his problems, his frustrations. How many times had I given him advice, telling him that life was about hard work, that he needed to take responsibility for his choices? I had never once considered that I was doing the same thing, shielding him from the consequences of the secrets I had kept. When Caleb came downstairs the following morning, I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He looked tired, worn out, like he hadn't slept in days. I had no idea where his mind was, but I knew he wasn't ready to hear what I had to say. Not yet, but it was time. "Caleb," I said, my voice steady but my heart racing. He didn't look at me at first. He just kept. His eyes focused on the coffee cup in his hands. I waited for him to acknowledge me, to say something, but he remained silent. "Caleb," I repeated, more gently this time, "I need you to listen to me." He finally raised his eyes, but his gaze was guarded. "What is it, Mom?" "I've been keeping something from you," I began, taking a deep breath. "Something important. And I need you to know the truth, not just about the money, but about everything." He set the coffee cup down slowly, his eyes narrowing. I could tell he was bracing himself for another shock, another betrayal. He wasn't sure if he could trust me again, and that hurt more than anything else. But I couldn't stop now. "It's not just about the fortune, Caleb," I continued. "It's about your father, about everything he left behind, about everything he kept from me, and about everything I kept from you. But I've made mistakes, and it's time I owned up to them." Caleb stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally he spoke, his voice low. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you just be honest?" The question cut through me, sharper than anything else he had said. "I thought I was protecting you," I said, my voice cracking. "I thought if I told you about all of this, about your father's will, about the trust, about everything that came after, it would just make things harder for you. I didn't want you to have to deal with all the complications. I wanted to protect you from the mess, from the pain." He shook his head, clearly frustrated. "So you thought I couldn't handle it? You thought I wouldn't be able to deal with it?" I met his eyes, holding my ground. "No, Caleb, I didn't think you couldn't handle it. I thought I could handle it for you, but I see now that I was wrong. You needed to know the truth, and I failed you." For a moment, the room was silent. Caleb's face softened, just a little, but I could see that his mind was racing. He was still processing everything, still trying to make sense of what I had just told him. But there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes now, a crack in the wall he had built between us. "I didn't know what to think, Mom," he said quietly. "I was angry. I felt like you had kept everything from me, like I couldn't trust you. But I see now that it's more complicated than that. I nodded. It always has been, Caleb. Life isn't as simple as we want it to be. I wanted to protect you from that. But I see now that protecting you means giving you the truth. And that means telling you everything about your father, about the money, and about why I made the choices I did. I paused for a moment, gathering my thoughts. Your father wasn't perfect. He wasn't the man I thought he was, and he certainly wasn't the father he could have been. But he loved you. In his own way, he wanted to make things right. He wanted you to have what he didn't know how to give you in life. Caleb looked down at his hands, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his sleeve. I don't know if I can ever see him the same way again. I took a step closer, my voice gentle but firm. You don't have to. You don't have to forgive him for what he did. But maybe you can forgive him for trying. Maybe you can understand that he wasn't perfect. None of us are. The words hung in the air, a delicate thread between us, and I could see that Caleb was beginning to see things from a new perspective. But there was still so much left unsaid, so much more to untangle. I can't fix what happened, Caleb, I said softly, but I can help you make sense of it. I can help you understand your father's choices. And maybe, just maybe, we can start to rebuild what we've lost. Caleb looked at me, his expression softer now. I don't know if I'm ready for all of this, he admitted. But I'll try. I just need time. Take all the time you need, I said. I'm not going anywhere. And for the first time in what felt like years, I felt like I had finally said what needed to be said. The days that followed our conversation felt oddly quieter, as though a heavy cloud had settled between Caleb and me. He was still distant, but there was a shift, a subtle one, like a small crack in a once solid wall. I could tell he was processing everything, trying to make sense of the truth I had laid before him. But it wasn't going to be easy. It would never be easy. The past had a way of lingering, of twisting itself around the present, suffocating any chance of moving forward without reckoning with the mess left behind. I tried to give him space, but I also knew that I couldn't let him isolate himself. There was a part of me, a deep maternal instinct that wanted to gather him up, to shield him from the pain. But I had learned, through all the years of protecting him, that I couldn't do that anymore. Caleb had to learn to face the hard truths, just as I had. One evening after dinner, I sat down at the kitchen table and opened the letter from Daniel once more. The one I had tucked away, buried under all the other papers and documents. I had been avoiding it for days, afraid of what it would reveal, afraid that reading it again would reopen wounds that I wasn't sure could heal. But I had no choice. Caleb needed to understand what had led us here, and that meant I needed to understand it too. Daniel's handwriting was unmistakable. The slanted loops, the careful precision that had always made his notes look almost like art. I had seen his handwriting thousands of times before, but this letter felt different. It wasn't just words on paper. It was his final attempt to reach out, to explain himself after a lifetime of silence. As I read the letter, a mix of emotions washed over me. Anger, regret, sadness. Daniel had written about his failure as a father, about how he had pushed Caleb away, about the guilt he had carried with him for years. But what struck me most was the honesty in his words. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness. It was simply the truth. And in that truth, I found a clarity that I hadn't known I needed. Daniel had known his time was running out. He had known that he hadn't been the man either of us needed him to be. He wrote about how he had hoped that the money, the fortune he had worked so hard to build, would be a way to make up for all the years he had spent away from his family. It was a twisted kind of redemption, but in his mind, it was the only thing he had left to offer. I closed the letter and sat in silence, the weight of Daniel's words sinking in. I couldn't change what had happened. I couldn't undo the years of neglect and distance between us. But maybe, just maybe, I could help Caleb understand why things had been the way they were. I couldn't fix the past, but I could help him navigate the future. The next day, Caleb came downstairs earlier than usual, his expression still distant but not as tense. He didn't say anything at first, but I could see he was thinking about something. I wasn't sure what had changed. but I knew that it had. "Mom," he said, his voice softer than I had heard it in days. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about Dad." I sat up straighter, my heart quickening in my chest. "And?" He looked at me, his eyes tired, but not angry. "I don't know how to feel about him anymore. I don't know if I can forgive him. But I guess I understand now why you didn't tell me everything, why you kept so much from me. You were trying to protect me, weren't you?" I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Yes, I was, but that doesn't mean I did the right thing." Caleb was quiet for a moment, and then he spoke again, his voice low. "I thought that the money, thought that was what mattered. That's what I was angry about. But now I don't know if it's the money that hurts. Maybe it's just the fact that Dad never gave me a chance to know him, that he didn't give us a chance." I felt a pang in my chest, a deep ache that I couldn't explain. I had spent so many years hoping that things would change, hoping that Daniel would see the family he had built, the son who needed him, before it was too late. But I also realized that Caleb had never had the chance to see his father the way I did. He had only seen the man who was absent, distant, and cold. "I think I need to hear more," Caleb continued, his voice stronger now. "About Dad. About what he was like. About the things you couldn't tell me before." I wasn't sure I was ready to dig deeper into the past, to dredge up the memories that had caused so much pain. But Caleb needed to know, and I needed to share it with him. We both needed to understand. "Okay," I said quietly, my hands trembling slightly. "I'll tell you everything I know. About your father, about the things he kept from us, and maybe, just maybe, you'll start to see the man behind the mistakes. Because he wasn't just the man who walked away, Caleb. He was also the man who tried to come back." Caleb looked at me, his expression softening. He was listening now, really listening. It felt like the first time in a long while that we were having a conversation instead of a confrontation. "Dad wasn't perfect," I continued, my voice faltering as the memories rushed back. "But he wasn't all bad either, and I need you to know that." Caleb nodded slowly. "I get that. I really do. I think I just need to start understanding him for who he really was." The weight of the conversation hung in the air between us, but it was different now. Lighter, maybe. We weren't finished yet, and I knew there was still so much more to unpack, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same page, like we were finally starting to move forward. The weeks that followed were a delicate balancing act, the quiet between Caleb and me filled with tentative steps toward rebuilding what had been broken. He still wasn't fully the son I had once known. There was still a distance between us, still a quiet sadness that lingered in the way he looked at me sometimes. But he was trying. And for the first time in years, I felt like we were finally talking, finally understanding each other in ways I hadn't thought possible. It wasn't just about the money anymore. That was the surprising part. Caleb had started asking questions about his father, about the life we had built together, and about the man Daniel had been. At first I wasn't sure I could answer him honestly. The past had been buried for so long, locked away in dusty corners of my mind. But the more Caleb asked, the more I realized that I couldn't hide anymore. I had to dig into the painful memories, the mistakes I had made, and the truths I had hidden from both of us. I took him to the old house one Saturday afternoon. It felt like a strange thing to do, bringing Caleb back to the place where we had lived for so long, a place now tainted with all the secrets Daniel had left behind, but there was no going around it. Caleb needed to see the house, to understand the full scope of his father's life. It wasn't just about the properties or the money. It was about the life that had been built on foundations that weren't as solid as we had once believed. We stood in the living room, the silence between us thick, as Caleb looked around. The house was the same, but it felt different now. The walls that had once felt so alive with laughter and conversation now seemed hollow, empty, echoing the ghosts of a life that had been carefully curated but never truly lived. "It's strange," Caleb said, his voice soft as he ran his hand over the armrest of the old couch. "I remember this place being so full of life, but now, It feels like a mausoleum." I didn't know what to say to that. He was right. The house was filled with memories, but they were memories of a life we had never fully embraced. The facade had been too perfect, too controlled, and when it cracked, it all came tumbling down. "I know," I said quietly. "I've spent so many years here, trying to hold everything together, trying to make it all work. But sometimes, things just aren't what they seem." Caleb turned to face me, his eyes searching mine. "You never told me how bad it got, did you? About you and Dad, about how much he shut you out." My heart clenched. I had never wanted Caleb to see that side of our marriage, the side where love had turned into routine, where communication had stopped, and everything had become about appearances. I had always protected him from the details, from the fights we'd had, the loneliness I'd felt. But now, it was impossible to shield him anymore. He needed the truth. He needed to understand that his father hadn't been a perfect man, and that I had made my own mistakes too. "No," I whispered, wiping away a stray tear. "I didn't want you to see it. I didn't want you to know how much we were struggling. I thought if I kept it all together, if I made everything look perfect, it would protect you from the pain." "Mom?" Caleb's voice was soft, his tone filled with something I couldn't quite place. "I wish you had told me. I wish I had known. I would have understood. I would have been there for you." I looked at him, my heart swelling with love and regret. How had we gotten here? How had I let the distance between us grow so wide? "I should have told you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But I didn't. I was afraid of what you might think. I was afraid that you'd see me as weak, as someone who couldn't keep it all together. But Caleb, the truth is, I wasn't strong enough to carry it alone. And your father, he wasn't strong enough either. We both failed each other." Caleb stood silently for a moment, the weight of my words settling between us. He looked down at his feet, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice quiet, but with a sense of finality. "I think I'm starting to understand, Mom. Maybe not everything, but enough." We stood there in silence for a long time, just taking in the enormity of what had been lost and what was still left to rebuild. The house may have been a symbol of everything we had tried to hold on to, but it was also a reminder of the things we had overlooked, of the love that had faded, of the pain that had been buried, and of the truth that had never been fully seen. But now, it was all coming to light. "I'm sorry," I said again, my voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for keeping all of this from you. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting you." "I know you did," Caleb replied, his voice quieter now. "I get that. But you can't protect me from everything, Mom. I have to learn the hard way sometimes. And maybe we both do." A few days later, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the documents in front of me. The lawyer's letter, the list of assets, the will that had been sealed away for so long, it was all overwhelming. I had spent so many years trying to hold on to the idea of a perfect family, of a perfect life. But now it was all unraveling, piece by piece. The truth about Daniel, the fortune he had left behind, and the legacy he had hoped to pass on. It was all out in the open. I had always been afraid of what Caleb would think if he knew the full story. But now, I realized that the truth wasn't something to be afraid of. It was something to be shared, to be understood. The wealth, the properties, the investments, they weren't the most important thing. What mattered was the legacy of love, of family, of forgiveness. And in order to move forward, we both had to accept the past, flawed, broken, and messy as it was. Caleb came down that morning, his eyes tired but softer than before. He had been spending more time in his room lately, thinking, processing, just as I had been. He looked at me, his expression uncertain but open. It felt like a small victory, a moment of connection that hadn't been there before. "I've been going through some things," he said slowly, sitting down at the table across from me. "I don't really know how to explain it, but I think I'm starting to see things differently. About Dad, about you, about everything." I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. What do you mean? I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive him for the way he treated us, for the way he shut us out. But I think I understand why he did it now. And maybe I understand you a little better too. The words hung in the air between us, and I felt a deep sense of relief wash over me. Caleb was finally beginning to see the truth, not just about his father, but about me, and about the choices we had both made. I don't expect you to forgive everything, Caleb, I said softly. But I hope one day you'll find peace with it, and with me. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. I think I'm getting there, slowly. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the resolution I had always hoped for, but it was a start, a step in the right direction. For the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope that we might rebuild, that we might find a way to heal together. There was so much left to work through, so many questions still unanswered. But I knew that for once, we weren't running away from the truth anymore. We were facing it together. As the days wore on, the truth became something we both couldn't escape. Caleb and I had started talking more openly, but there was still an unspoken barrier between us, one that could only be broken by diving deeper into the things that had been hidden for so long. It was time to face the documents, the numbers, the truth of what Daniel had left behind. I pulled the folder from the drawer one night after dinner, feeling the weight of everything it contained. I had been avoiding it for so long, hoping that, somehow, the truth might just be buried under the weight of my silence. But I had promised Caleb I would explain everything, and this was the heart of it all. Caleb sat beside me at the kitchen table, his face serious as I opened the folder. He was no longer angry, not like he had been when this whole mess started. But the sadness was still there, lingering in his eyes, a reflection of the boy who had once trusted me blindly and now found himself standing at the crossroads of so many broken things. Okay, I said, taking a deep breath. Here's the part you've been waiting for. The money, the trust, the assets Daniel left behind. Everything you need to understand about what's waiting for you. Caleb didn't speak, but I could feel his eyes on me, his gaze intense. I shuffled through the papers, the rustling sound filling the space between us. There were bank statements, property deeds, and a letter from Daniel's lawyer, each document a reminder of the life Daniel had created, a life that had been so different from the one Caleb and I had lived. Finally, I found what I was looking for, the trust document. It was dated just a few months before Daniel's death, and the terms were clear. Caleb was the sole beneficiary, but there were conditions. The first was simple enough. He had to be of legal age. The second, however, was more complicated. Caleb had to prove his ability to manage the fortune responsibly, to show that he could handle the weight of the assets that had been entrusted to him. I slid the document across the table to Caleb. This is what Daniel wanted for you. He wanted you to have everything he built, but he needed you to prove that you were ready for it. And I paused, swallowing hard. I didn't think you were. Caleb stared at the document, his fingers hovering over it, but not yet touching it. I could see the wheels turning in his mind, the realization settling in. He had never asked for this. He hadn't asked for his father's wealth, his legacy. And yet, here it was, a burden that would now fall on his shoulders whether he was ready or not. Why didn't you tell me about this sooner? Caleb asked, his voice low, almost regretful. Why keep me in the dark? I thought I was protecting you, I said quietly. I thought that by keeping this from you, by not telling you about the trust, I was shielding you from the pressure. But I see now that I was wrong. You had the right to know, Caleb. You had the right to make your own choices, to decide what to do with this. But I didn't trust you enough to give you that. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he picked up the document and began reading through it, his eyes scanning the legal language, the numbers, the fine print. I could see his mind processing everything, trying to absorb the enormity of what was in front of him. I never asked for this, Caleb finally said, looking up at me. I never asked for any of it. This is all so much. I don't know if I can handle it. You don't have to do it alone, I said softly. I'm here, Caleb. Whatever you choose to do with this, I'll be here to help you. You Don't have to carry this burden by yourself. He stared at the trust document for a few more moments, his fingers tracing the edges of the paper, as if trying to make sense of the weight it carried. Finally, he pushed the paper back toward me, his expression unreadable. I don't know what to do with it, he muttered, but I'll figure it out. I'm going to take my time, think about it. I don't want to make any rash decisions. No, I said, nodding. Take your time. This isn't something you have to decide right now. And so we sat there, in the quiet of the kitchen, the weight of the trust between us, unspoken but understood. Caleb didn't know yet what he would do with the fortune he had inherited. He didn't know if he was ready to step into the life his father had left behind. But one thing was certain. Caleb was no longer the boy I had raised. He was becoming a man, and the choices he would make from here on out would be his own. The next few days passed in a strange kind of limbo. Caleb had taken the trust documents with him when he left for work, and I didn't press him about it. I could tell he was still processing everything, the magnitude of the situation, the weight of the legacy he had inherited, and the uncertainty of what it all meant for him. As for me, I found myself staring at the walls more than I wanted to. Admit, caught between relief and regret, I had finally told Caleb the truth, finally revealed the secrets that had been buried for so long. But now that the truth was out, I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how to repair the fractures that had formed in our relationship, or if I even could. The money, the trust, it had always been a symbol of what was supposed to come next. But now, it felt like a burden more than a blessing. Caleb came home late that night, looking tired and worn out, his brow furrowed as he dropped his keys on the counter and kicked off his shoes. I could tell he hadn't gotten any closer to a decision about the trust, and yet I knew something had shifted in him. There was a quiet determination in the way he carried himself now, a kind of resolve that hadn't been there before. He sat down at the table across from me, his hands folded. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, his voice softer than usual. "About what you said, about Dad, about the money." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. I didn't want to push him, didn't want to rush him into an answer. I get it now," Caleb said slowly, his gaze steady. "I think I understand why you kept everything from me, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for accusing you. I was angry, and I didn't know how to handle it." I shook my head, cutting him off. "You don't have to apologize, Caleb. You were right to be angry. I should have told you the truth." He smiled faintly. "Yeah, well, I guess I was angry at the wrong thing. I wasn't angry at you, or even at Dad. I was angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. I didn't want to face the fact that he wasn't perfect, that he wasn't the man I thought he was." "I think we both had that image of him," I said, softly, looking down at my hands. "But he was just a man, Caleb. He made mistakes, just like we all do." Caleb's eyes met mine, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a spark of understanding in his gaze. "I don't know what I'm going to do with the money, Mom. I don't know if I even want it. But I do know one thing. I don't want to be like him. I don't want to let this fortune define me." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, a quiet sense of pride. Caleb wasn't just trying to carry on his father's legacy. He was creating his own. And maybe, just maybe, that was what mattered most. The next few weeks were quieter, filled with little moments of understanding and tentative conversations between Caleb and me. It was clear that the trust, the fortune, and the legacy of his father were still hanging over us like a cloud. But Caleb was no longer consumed by it. He had stopped trying to figure out how to use the inheritance for something that would make him feel worthy. Instead, he was focusing on finding a way to stand on his own, to carve out a future that wasn't defined by the past. One evening, as we sat in the kitchen, I noticed Caleb's quiet contemplation. He hadn't mentioned the trust or his father in days, and I knew he was thinking about the decision he had yet to make. I had tried to give him space, but now I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to know what he had decided, even if it meant opening the door to a conversation we had both been avoiding. "Caleb," I said softly, breaking the silence that had settled between us. "You've been so quiet lately. What are you thinking?" He glanced up at me, his expression thoughtful. "I'm not sure," he admitted. I've been thinking about everything. The money, Dad, the trust. But more than that, I've been thinking about what I want. What I want for myself, not just for my future, but for my life. I felt a pang of hope in my chest. Caleb wasn't just reacting to the inheritance. He was trying to understand what it meant for him personally, what kind of life he wanted to lead outside of his father's shadow. Do you know what you want? I asked gently. He shrugged, his eyes drifting toward the window, as though seeking the answers in the fading sunlight. I'm still figuring it out, but I do know that I don't want to be defined by the money. I don't want to be like Dad, building a life around all these things that don't really matter. I've seen enough of that. I nodded slowly, my heart swelling with pride. I'm proud of you, Caleb. You're starting to see what I couldn't show you before. Money isn't everything. And legacy, well, it's what you make of it. You don't have to follow anyone else's path, especially not your father's. You're your own person. He met my eyes then, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a glimmer of the boy I had raised, the one who still believed in the importance of love, of family, and of doing things the right way. I don't think I want to take the inheritance, Caleb said slowly. Not the way it's been laid out. Maybe I'll take some of it, but I want to do something that feels right for me. I want to work for it, earn it, build something on my own. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the answer I had expected, but it was the one that made the most sense. Caleb wasn't running away from his father's legacy, but he wasn't letting it define him either. He wanted to be his own person, to carve out his own place in the world. You're making a choice, I said quietly, a difficult one, but a brave one, and I'm proud of you for it. Caleb smiled faintly, a weight lifting from his shoulders. I think I'm finally starting to get it. I don't need the past to guide me anymore. I need to start writing my own story. The days that followed Caleb's decision were filled with a quiet sense of resolution. He didn't make any dramatic announcements, didn't throw the money or the properties away, but he started making small changes. Caleb enrolled in a business course at the local college, something he had always wanted to do, but had never really had the confidence to pursue. He started taking on freelance work, earning his own money, building his own future without relying on the fortune his father had left behind. As for me, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of relief. The trust, the money, it no longer felt like a looming threat. Caleb was no longer weighed down by the expectations of the past. He was moving forward, and so was I. I had always believed that the key to happiness was finding peace within yourself. For years, I had held on to the idea of protecting Caleb, of shielding him from the harsh realities of life. But now I realized that I had to let him make his own choices, face his own struggles. It was the only way he could truly grow, and it was the only way I could stop carrying the burden of the past. One afternoon, I went to the garden and sat on the porch, watching the flowers bloom in the spring sunlight. I hadn't tended to the garden in years, too busy with everything else to focus on something so simple. But now, it felt like a symbol of the new chapter I was beginning to write for myself. Caleb was finding his own path, and I was finally allowing myself to do the same. I had started taking evening walks again, something I hadn't done in years. It was a small thing, but it was my way of reconnecting with myself, of finding peace in the silence of the evening. I didn't need anyone else to define me anymore. I was no longer just a wife, a mother, or the woman who had lived in the shadow of her husband's mistakes. I was becoming my own person again. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer held power over me. I had made my peace with Daniel's mistakes, with my own choices, and with the legacy we had tried to build together. Now I was free to create my own future. Life started to feel different in small, almost imperceptible ways. Caleb was still adjusting to his decision, still figuring out his next steps, but I could see the change in him. He was more confident, more determined. He wasn't looking for approval anymore. He was finding his own answers. I had taken up a new hobby, something I had always wanted to do, but had never made the time for. Painting. It felt liberating, sitting in front of the canvas, with nothing but my thoughts and the brush, watching colors come to life in a way I had never imagined. It was as if I was creating something new, something that wasn't tied to the past. It wasn't just a way to pass the time. It was my way of reclaiming the parts of myself I had left behind. Caleb noticed the change in me, too. One evening, after he had come home from a long day of work, he sat down at the kitchen table across from me, his eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before. Respect, maybe even admiration. "I see you," he said quietly, his voice tinged with awe. "I see you finding yourself again. And I think I'm starting to find myself too." I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. Caleb was right. We were both finding ourselves again, but it wasn't just about the past or the legacy that had been handed down to us. It was about who we were becoming and who we could be moving forward. "I'm proud of you, Caleb," I said softly, "and I'm proud of myself too." And for the first time in what felt like years, I realized that I had found my peace, not in the past, not in the mistakes we had made, but in the quiet, deliberate steps we were both taking towards something new. We weren't just surviving anymore, we were living. It was a year later, and things had changed. Caleb had finished his business course, and his freelance work had taken off. He wasn't relying on the inheritance anymore, not in the way he once had. He had worked hard to create his own opportunities, and I watched him step into his own power with a quiet determination. There were still moments of doubt, moments when he looked at the trust documents and the life his father had left behind, but they no longer held the same weight. He had found his own path, a path that wasn't defined by the fortune, by his father's mistakes, or even by me. As for me, I had settled into my own rhythm. I'd found peace in painting, in rediscovering parts of myself I'd forgotten. I spent my mornings with a cup of coffee and a brush in hand, my afternoons on long walks, and my evenings reading the novels I hadn't had time to enjoy before. It wasn't extravagant, but it was enough. I had stopped looking for validation outside of myself. I had started building a life that made sense for me, not for anyone else. One afternoon, Caleb and I sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The house, once a symbol of everything that had been broken between us, now felt like a home again. It was still filled with memories, but they weren't the only thing that defined it. We had learned to live with those memories, to carry them, without letting them weigh us down. "Mom," Caleb said, breaking the silence, "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About Dad, about you, about the trust, and I think I finally get it. I get why you kept so much from me, why you did what you did, and I'm sorry for not understanding sooner." I turned to look at him, my heart full. "Caleb, you don't have to apologize. We both made mistakes, but we're moving forward now. That's what matters." He smiled, a real smile this time, one that reached his eyes. "Yeah, I think we are." We sat there in companionable silence, the evening air cool and still around us. It was the first time in a long while that I felt truly at peace with the past, with the present, and with the future. We had come full circle, each of us finding our way back to the people we were meant to be. The mistakes, the pain, the betrayal, they would always be a part of our story, but they no longer had the power to define us. I had spent so many years trying to protect Caleb from the world, from the things that had hurt me. But now I saw that the only way to protect him was to allow him to face those things himself. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And in doing so, we had both grown stronger. We were no longer bound by the mistakes of the past. We had forged our own way forward. A year had passed, and the house no longer felt heavy with the weight of the past. Caleb had finally settled into his new life, carving out a future that was uniquely his. His work was thriving, and he had even begun a small business of his own. The money from the trust, the legacy left behind by his father, wasn't the center of his life anymore. He had found something far more valuable, his own sense of purpose. As for me, I had finally let go of the lingering doubts and fears that had held me back for so long. I no longer sought approval from anyone. I no longer clung to the idea of perfection or stability. I was living my truth, and that truth was enough. One day I received a call from a local women's group. They had heard about the changes in my life, about the courage I had shown in facing my past, and they wanted me to speak at an event. At first I hesitated. I had spent so many years living in the shadows of other people's stories. I wasn't sure if I could stand in the spotlight, if I had the strength to share my journey. But then I thought about everything I had gone through, the pain, the heartbreak, the quiet revolution that had taken place in my life. And I realized that my story wasn't just mine to keep. It was a story of resilience, of reclaiming what was lost, of finding strength in the most unexpected places. It was a story that needed to be shared. When I stood at the podium that evening, speaking to a room full of women who had their own stories of pain and triumph, I didn't feel the weight of the past anymore. I felt free. I spoke about the importance of forgiveness, not just for others, but for ourselves. I spoke about the power of owning our stories, about the strength that comes from embracing the messy, imperfect parts of our lives. And when I finished, the room was silent, but there was an energy in the air, an energy of understanding, of connection. Afterward, a woman came up to me, her eyes filled with tears. "Your story," she whispered. "It's my story. You helped me see that I can move forward too." And in that moment, I knew that my journey hadn't just been about me. It had been about everyone I met along the way, everyone who had struggled, everyone who had fallen but gotten up again. My story was a part of a larger narrative, one that connected us all. And for the first time in a long time, I felt proud of the woman I had become. As I walked out of the event that night, Caleb called me. I could hear the pride in his voice, the quiet joy that had replaced the anger and confusion of the past. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said. "You've come so far. I think you found something more important than any money, any inheritance. You found yourself." And as I looked out at the city skyline, the lights twinkling in the distance, I realized that he was right. I had found myself. And that, more than anything, was the greatest gift of all. The years have passed since that night, and Caleb and I have both continued to grow, to evolve. Life has not been without its challenges, but we have faced them with a sense of quiet strength that we didn't have before. The inheritance, the fortune, the legacy, they are no longer at the center of our lives. We have built our own paths, guided not by the past, but by the lessons we've learned along the way. Caleb has become a successful entrepreneur, still humble and grounded, despite the wealth he could have easily taken for granted. He uses his success to help others, creating opportunities for young people who didn't have the advantages he once had. He's found peace with the past and doesn't let it define him. As for me, I have found peace in my own way. I'm not the woman I once was, the one who clung to the idea of perfection, the one who tried to shield her son from the world. I am someone who has learned to embrace her flaws, her mistakes, and her triumphs. I am not defined by the choices others have made for me, but by the choices I have made for myself. I still paint, still walk in the evenings, and still find joy in the simple things. And every now and then, I'll find myself sitting at the kitchen table, looking at the house that once felt so heavy, and realizing that it is no longer just a home, it is a place of new beginnings. The past will always be a part of me, but it no longer holds me captive. The future is mine to shape, and for the first time in my life, I am truly free.